Good afternoon and good evening. Welcome to TFH, the Full 100. Today is Monday, the 11th of May, 2020. This is the first show of the week, and we're following on from the call to action, which has been the title or the subject matter of my previous two videos on Thursday of last week and Friday. So you could say this is the third installment of a call to action. I'd like to start today's video by showing you two new videos of very disturbing incidences, which further adds to the urgency of my call to action. Without further ado, let's get to it. I'm going to start today's show by showing you this first video, which is of a doctor serving his neighborhood, doing the right thing, protecting himself, and yet he's embarrassed, treated poorly, and basically put in handcuffs by a cop who had no gloves on and no mask on. Clearly might have come in contact with lots of people during the course of that day, and this poor gentleman, who's black, because black people are more likely to get touched by a white cop. So the chances are, if your police are not protecting themselves adequately in this time, the chances are they're going to pass it more to the ethnic minorities than any other demographic. Please take a look at this video, and I'll see you on the other side.
Going to end today's show in Florida, where the Miami Police Department is under fire after a video surfaced of an officer handcuffing and detaining an African-American doctor outside his home on Friday. The man, Armin Anderson, was wearing a mask and preparing for a volunteer shift, helping protect homeless people from the spread of COVID-19, when a patrol car pulled up to his home. Surveillance video from Dr. Henderson's house shows him loading a van with supplies before the encounter. Dr. Henderson says the police officer handcuffed him after accusing him of littering and then asking for identification, which Henderson did not have on him. The officer was not wearing a mask. Dr. Henderson was. He had to yell to his wife inside their home to present identification before the officer finally released him. On Saturday, Miami Police Chief has ordered an internal investigation into the incident. The officer involved has not been identified. The encounter sparked widespread outrage and comes as African-American men report fears of increased racial profiling when they're following the CDC's suggestion that people wear masks in public. For more, we go to Miami to speak with Dr. Armin Henderson, an internal medicine physician, assistant professor of medicine at the University of Miami, also an organizer with Dream Defenders. He was recently profiled by the Miami Herald. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Dr. Henderson. Tell us in your own words what you were doing on Friday, and then what happened.
Yeah, so I was pretty much just putting tents in my car, you know, I was loading other supplies into my van, and you know, while I was doing that, I noticed that the police officer rode down the street, that a cross-section of my block, one way, really slow, and then he came back around the street the other way and basically turned down my block. And he pulled up next to me, questioning me if I lived there, if I worked here. I told him that I lived there. I told him what I was doing. I told him that, you know, where I was putting the boxes was where the city of Miami comes to pick up our trash every week. For example, they're here this week, and people who have on my block are putting trash in the same place that I put the boxes. You know.
Welcome back. As sad as that is to see, we're not going to go over to the UK and an incident that occurred just this weekend of a father being tasered in front of his toddler. Now, bear in mind, this will never happen to anybody other than someone from the ethnic minorities. Please take a look.
Oh my god, he's got a kid with him. Oh my god, he's got a kid with him. Oh my god.
Put your hands behind your back now. Put your hands behind your back now. Get your hands behind your back now.
Welcome back. That distressed me a great deal this weekend and further drove me to double down my efforts to try my best to bring this to the attention of those who are able to effect change. I'll now like to go to my statement, which I have prepared, and further explain my ideas of a union of black nations. I want to humbly address this statement to the following world leaders. Her Majesty, the Queen of England, President Barack Obama, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Barbados, Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, President of Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara, and lastly, but surely not least, the Prime Minister of Sudan, Abdallah Hamdok. Let me begin with Her Majesty the Queen of England. Your Majesty, for too long now, you have failed to protect your ethnic subjects, both here at home and abroad. It is not too off base to think that, seeing as this country and your very own ancestors benefited greatly off the African countries and citizens, that you would empathize with the plight of the ethnic peoples of not just this country, but around the Commonwealth and further. Instead, all we have had is you sticking to tradition while souls suffer and die. Tradition seems more important than human life. You said in your recent speech, and I quote, "Our streets are not empty, but filled with love we have for each other." Your Majesty, I'm sorry to say this. Our streets are not filled with love and joy. There is no love or joy for a large group of your subjects. Yet you stand by and say nothing. We are killed regularly, treated badly regularly, victimized regularly, and blamed regularly. Yet we bear the brunt of the load at times of crisis in doing the jobs which allows us all to survive. And yet you stand by and take no positive action. I don't blame you, however, Your Majesty. I blame leaders of the black nations. Had a single one of them expressed distress and concern on a regular basis, maybe, just maybe, you might have acted. To you, my African and Black nation leaders, why haven't any one of you raised issues with Her Majesty's government, with the US government, the French government, and more recently, even the Chinese government? When will you all, as a collective, have had enough? Do you not see the value other nations place on the safety and well-being of its citizens? I recently called for the young, up-and-coming politicians of Africa to rise up and take over from your generation of rulers. I meant it. However, here is an opportunity to create a legacy, to make a difference in billions of lives across the globe, to actively take control, seize control, wrestle, or grab, as long as we have control of our own destiny as a collective. My plea is to begin conversations amongst yourselves with a view to exploring the possibilities, boundaries, logistics, and timing. The union of Black nations is a must. It is our only guaranteed way of securing all of our futures quickly. We have no time to wait. Incidents shown in today's video need to be a distant memory before my future grandchildren reach adulthood. I do not want to believe that we could come, we could see, and we couldn't do a thing. I have included Her Excellency Mia Mottley and His Excellency Andrew Holness of Barbados and Jamaica, respectively, to begin the Caribbean conversations. His Excellency Miguel Diaz-Canel of Cuba should consult with the Spanish-speaking Black nations. Sudanese Prime Minister, His Excellency Abdullah Hamdok, to begin conversations with our Muslim nations, along with His Excellency President Alassane Ouattara of the Ivory Coast, as the two leading nations to communicate with our Muslim brothers and sisters. Leaders of Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Ethiopia, please begin conversations with nations about the same. In particular, I want to address President Ahmed of Ethiopia. Your country, Your Excellency, is home to our Jewish brothers and sisters. Let's not forget those Rastafarians across the world who see Ethiopia as home. We welcome you with open arms. Ethiopia is unique within the family of nations and so has a huge role to play. President Barack Obama, your ancestors and your relatives still reside in Kenya. You, Barack Obama, has a major role to play, sir. Let's begin the process which will see no more Trayvon Martins. I watched you try, President Obama. I watched you try, but it wasn't enough. Had the Union of Black Nations been an entity in the manner it has to be built, your work would have been much easier. You would only have needed to facilitate the diplomatic efforts of the Union of Black Nations. No police commissioner or chief of police needs a diplomatic headache. Mr. President, your remit is to oversee this project so it is fit for purpose. So it does exactly what it says on the tin. To Her Majesty, the Queen of England, I humbly ask that you lead by example. I ask and urge that you put tradition aside. Our streets are not the loving and kind world your childhood was. It is a nightmare for some. For many, the boogeyman looks just like you. It is the racism, it is the ethnic minority nurses not getting PPEs due to institutional racism. It is the tasing of a father in the presence of his toddler child. It is the unfair incarcerating of thousands of us. It is the criminalization of a whole generation of blacks, both here and across the Atlantic in the US and other Western countries. It is the educational obstacles. It is the lack of opportunities. And it is the uneven access to promise. You must seize the moment. I believe you breaking from tradition and addressing this in a speech will do more than has been achieved in 60 years. To my fellow world citizens of African descent, this cannot succeed without you. All divisions must cease. All characterizations and local differences, international or regional identity differences must cease for us to help us. It has been suggested Black Americans will not be happy with this. When I asked why that was, I was told because they identify as African Americans. If we allow identity issues such as that to become an obstacle to you being protected, then that'll be a sad, sad day. We must see as one people, but think individually. Failure is not an option. To all non-black citizens of the world, I envisage a route to being welcome into the Union as citizens. If not automatically by eligibility, for example, by marriage, birth, or rights, I will suggest a pathway be built into its rule books for non-eligible people to be admitted into the Union and therefore entitled to all benefits such as that such status affords the holder. Our mission is not to exclude, but to protect. Opportunities will be endless. Results will lift many out of poverty and provide safety and sanctuary for millions. Those living under brutal treatment at home will have a voice at last. On the ground, once conversations begin, I urge the second level conversations to also begin. The local institutions of each country talking and discussing roadmaps to the ultimate goal of alignment for mutual cooperation and benefits. The police and security services, the health authorities, the courts, ministries, especially the education ministries. We must begin the process of changing the narrative. Begin telling our own true history, our own achievements, and create our own curriculums to uplift, enlighten, and break free of the sometimes derogatory and patronizing narrative we find in the colonial narrative which still exists in our books and classrooms. The media. I urge all media corporations, television, news, print media, filmmakers, and regional press to speak. You must begin conscious work at changing that narrative from a negative one to a positive one. I would like to see a very careful decision-making process when issuing permits for outside film or documentary teams to document or film inside the Union of Black Nations. For too long now, we have seen only stories of poverty, suffering, chaos, and misery in member states. We very rarely see our thriving, beautiful cities depicted in a positive light, if at all. We never see our beautiful beaches, our innovating successes, or other positive stories. We only see positive films when David Attenborough visits the wildlife reserves. This needs to change. That change is down to you, the media of the Union of Black Nations. Our infrastructure must be a priority. Social security and welfare state a priority. Upgrading of healthcare infrastructure, first response capabilities, law enforcement, human dignity, and respect principles must be aligned. This alignment will have the human rights laws as a basis from which new laws and reforms, as well as alignment agreements, are made. Human rights and human justice will be guaranteed. Under the Union of Black Nations, corruption will have no foothold in the Union. Corruption has paralyzed our black countries for too long. Corruption means a local council or members of local authorities are happy to drive past the poor in schools with no windows or toilets. They are okay to know that funds allocated to building a hospital were distributed amongst themselves, while leaving the local people with a shack or a tent for their money. This cannot be allowed to take hold in the Union. Oversight and checks and balances mechanisms must be highly effective. These are more examples of my vision of the Union. Ladies and gentlemen, you have the tools and the ability to do this. If this makes sense and is worth exploring, even for a second, then pick up that phone and make that call to a fellow world leader. Greta Thunberg brought the climate issue to us all and made some changes. It matters not who proposed the idea. No group, race, or sex has a monopoly to great ideas. I hope and pray we see this through. I thank you once again for listening to my humble self. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'd like to say a few things now I've finished with the speech. I'd like to say that since I've put these ideas out, I have had a lot of communication with family, with my father, who's very interested in this at 84 years old. And I'm hoping that his generation of black people across the world can see that if we had something like this in place, would have made a huge difference to the lives of many. I'd like to say this, that I know we will have resistance, especially from those who look like me, but they do not think like the rest of us do. They are suspicious, don't wish to understand or process. Some will accuse us of working with the enemy. Some will accuse us of leading them to prison or worse, yet they are the ones in self-imprisonment. Let's try to save everyone, but also understand you cannot save them all. Let's waste no time convincing the non-believers. Regardless, let us not let ignorance stop us. Failure is really not an option. I hope this is being discussed out in the wider world. I know this will not happen overnight. I do not expect it to happen in a year or two. However, as a 52-year-old, if I leave this planet in 30 years from now, I would like to see a union of black nations in existence before I go to my grave. That's about it. Tomorrow we'll be going back to the topic at hand, which is the coronavirus pandemic. And I'll bring you guys back up to speed with that. However, keep an eye out on my channel. I will be updating you with regards to our call to action. Thanks once again for watching and have a fantastic day. Take care. Bye-bye.